Hi.
Great. All right. Continuing with Dr. Guy Chet, author of My Brother's Keeper, the complicated relationship between American Jews and Israel. And we've kind of started a series of videos where we've been discussing um, kind of the history of the Middle Eastern conflict and gaining kind of a geographic understanding. But in the last conversation we had, we were kind of more going into Judaism and what does a lot of the things mean, and where does some of these, what are some of the misconceptions and conceptions or proper understandings of Judaism and how they are interpreted in non-Jewish circles. And this morning, I guess just because we were going to have this video, it was in a guy evangelizing outside of the university where I teach, and he had brought up the fact that the Jewish people, I, based on his car and what he was saying, the gentleman was Christian, and in his preaching, he specifically felt the need, and I was Christian for over 40 years, maybe 45, 46. I was Catholic, so I'm not a stranger to religion. I've read about, you know, all of the Abrahamic religions. So relatively astute when it comes to religions, but that really got me thinking when he had gotten to the part that he said that the reason why Jesus died was because he was given over to the Romans by the Jews that hated him. And I read the Bible pretty close. And I didn't get that part of out of the King James version of the Bible or the Catholic Bible. And I've read a few other Bibles, which that's another thing. Christians, there's more than one Bible, not just one. So I've always wondered, where did that rhetoric come from? Because I did not see it explicitly stated in any of the Abrahamic um, text, meaning the Torah, the Bible, or the Quran, that there was a dislike
Yeah. No, I
for
so
Jesus by Jewish people. Is that true?
it is true. Look, Jesus. So I'll start with this. You will not find any of this in the Hebrew Bible, meaning in the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, which make up the what's called the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. Okay, but you won't find it in the Old Testament simply because the Old Testament was finished and sealed before
For
Jesus was born.
Jesus. Right, right, right.
Um, in the
But
Quran, I don't know.
I meant in the New Testament, you didn't see a hatred.
Right. So
But unless I misunderstood it.
so again, I'm Jewish. I've read in the New Testament. I haven't read the New Testament in whole, and I'm not. It's less interesting to me. I haven't read much. I've read in it, but I'm not an expert. But my understanding of the Gospels is they do talk about the clash between Jesus prophesying
And
uh,
the Pharisees.
and suggesting that he's a Messiah, and the Jewish authorities in the temple and in general. Uh, so there was this enmity, and my understanding of the Gospels has the Jewish authorities, the Sanhedrin, it's kind of the Jewish religious authority under Roman political authority, accusing him of something like blasphemy or apostasy or something, some sort of
Heresy.
religious offense, heresy, and then handing him over as, so the Jewish authorities could not punish they could only convict, and then the punishment would be by the political authorities. And so they handed him to the Roman governor, and he conducted the trial and uh, punished him. Um, so so that is the Jew's role in his crucifixion,
Passion.
death. Um, but beyond this, the kind of the hate or the enmity, but Jesus was this messianic figure, which the Jews at the time and still today considered a false Messiah.
Hmm.
Okay, that he is a that he well, false messiahs, false prophets are very dangerous people in the sense that they lead good people into a false religion or into a false understanding. Um, and so I have no doubt that Jewish authorities and Jews who didn't see him as a Messiah thought that he was a liar and dangerous and, well, everything that we associate with false prophet, false messiahs. Um, and that view persists. So Jews at the time who were followers of Christ obviously saw him as a real Messiah, and Christians through the ages saw him as a true Messiah, and Jews through the ages saw him and see him as a false Messiah.
Okay. Now, I when I started studying as a historian, I started to notice that things biblically did not align chronologically with what we would call academic history or natural history. And I was told by some clergy that religious, you have biblical history, and then you have natural history.
Like history.
Is that the same dynamic in Judaism, or does Judaism chronologically align with?
Um, with academic history or archaeology. Like with Christian history or church history, somewhat, but not exactly. Like in big chunks, yes, but there are all these uh, academic debates about dating and and how it aligns or contradicts the biblical storyline, the biblical dating. I'll just say, I'll say two things. First of all, we need to keep in mind that the academic history, the historical history, archaeology, changes too. Okay, so like 40 years ago, 30 years ago, archaeologists and historians told you this King David figure, he's not a real figure. Okay, he's kind of like Abraham, Jacob, um, or Noah. He's a mythic figure that the Jews kind of retroactively created and projected onto him this great halcyon days of a Jewish kingdom, because we have no evidence and no records. The only record of him is in the Bible.
Right.
And you simple folk who believe in the Bible, that's fine. Look, you have your biblical history, but we're dealing with the real world. We're dealing with real history. Okay, so you live in your with your myths of a King David and a Noah and an Abraham, and we, the real historians, will deal with reality. And then about 20 years ago, they discovered a pot or some sort of a stela, a stone tablet in Jordan, I think, in the kingdom of Idumea that mentions King David. Okay, so all of a sudden, all those fools who for years, for centuries, insisted, no, no, the Bible is correct. There was a King David. He was a great king. He ruled over a Jewish kingdom, and he is the father of those Jewish kings that came after him. Turns out that they weren't fools. And all the academic historians who chastised them for believing this mythology, turns out that they were wrong. So a lot of these things about the dating, I would I would take with a grain of salt, not because I know that they're wrong, but because archaeological knowledge also is found out by later generations of archaeologists and historians to have been incorrect. And what we used to date to the 8th century, now we have new data that actually pushes it back to the 10th century, BC. And so what used to be way off compared to the biblical account is now actually pretty close. So I would not. Archaeology, ancient archaeology is very, the records are so slim. It really is a puzzle with 70% of the puzzle pieces missing. So it's a lot of kind of conjecture, and I'd hesitate to take it to the bank every time, number one. And more important, um, the Bible, if you look at the Bible as a history book or a biology book or a geology book, I think uh, you're missing the point. Okay? We had a speaker once at UNT, and he was a philosopher. He was a Jewish philosopher. I mean, he was a Jewish fella, but an observant Jew with a kippah on his
Mhm.
head. But he was a philosopher about something else. But the students saw that he was religious, and so they asked him about the Bible and is the Bible true? Is the Bible correct? And he said, well, it depends on what you mean by correct. Okay, so he says, if it'll take a little bit of time, but he said basically he said, if I read a John Grisham novel and he talks about some restaurant in Washington, D.C. where something happens, and then I go to that street and there's no restaurant there, if I call him to complain, hey, your book is not true, there's no restaurant there, he would say, you're missing the point. The book is meant to entertain and to give kind of dramatic character studies. It's not a reference guide to restaurants in Washington, D.C. And by the same token, if I read the yellow pages, the phone book, and then I call the phone book company and complain, hey, your book is really boring, they'd say, look, it's not meant to entertain you, it's a reference guide. So by the same token, if you're reading the Bible as a historical account of, what is correct here, like judging it as you would a history textbook, you might be conducting or looking at the um, the astronomical account of the creation of the universe or the creation of, the how human beings were created or evolved
Mhm.
as a biology textbook. You're missing the point. The Bible is not a biology textbook. It's not a history textbook. It's a book about um, divine order in the world, about divine justice in the world. That's the point. Okay. This is what he was saying. So if you ask me, is the Bible true? He says, yes, the Bible is true, not because I think the geological discussion of the creation of the earth is true, but because I think that the moral, the divine justice in the world that the Bible describes and explains, that is true. So I think we need to look at judge the Bible based on what it is, not what it's not.
Would you say that would be for all of the great books
Yeah,
equally?
yeah, yeah.
The Torah, the Quran, the Gita, the
Yeah, look,
Bible.
yeah, look, any book, any
Okay.
book, you should judge it based on somebody
Well,
can
that's just it. A lot of people think that the Bible is history. Like that happened. It happened when it happened, how it happened, that That's what it's for. And if there is fault in it, then the house of cards falls down.
Right.
So,
Right, but I think I don't know, but I my sense is that most people who make this claim make it defensively. Okay? So look, a lot of the stuff that's in the Bible did happen. A lot of the Bible is historical, and some of it, either we don't have proof that it's historical, or we assume that it's not historical, like talking snakes, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and so the Bible is a mix of things that did happen and of things that didn't happen. And in this respect, it's kind of like a lot of ancient histories by Polybius and Herodotus and Plutarch, where they were writing histories and they were mixing things that really did happen, plus things that they invented, all sorts of dialogues that they inserted, because the standard that they had for what is good history is not that the truth, uh, the truth, all the truth, and nothing but the truth, but something that teaches you what happened and the meaning of it.
yeah,
And for that, they needed to insert certain omens and certain
parables,
dialogues and parables
right?
um, and so the again, judging it for what it is, an ancient history is not like a modern history in the sense that a modern history is supposed to be the truth, all the truth, and nothing but the truth. That's not what
Mhm.
ancient histories were. And so I think people who today, or in the past few hundred years, insist everything is true literally, I think they came up with this position out of this kind of defensiveness where you, the secular world, or the attack on the Bible, either by other religion or by secularists, has created this defensive um, response of if you point out that something is untrue in my Bible, I'm doubling down. It is true. It's like I think when, let's say, before the birth of Islam and after the rise of Christianity to be the dominant religion in the Roman Empire and in the West. So when Judaism was no longer a challenge and when Islam was no longer a challenge, and definitely before um, kind of secular humanism became a challenge, I don't think they were having this fundamentalism about the historical truth of every word in the Bible was not part of Christian the historical truth of every word was not part of Christian theology. I think fundamentalism is
It
a
wasn't a part of
phenomenon.
theological debate.
Yes, I think fundamentalism, this insistence that every word is true and every bit of history in the Bible is true, that's more of a modern thing in the last 300-400 years, and that comes from attacks on the or challenges to the veracity of the Bible. So I think it's a kind of a
Okay,
response. You're saying that something is not true. I'm therefore insisting that it is true.
okay. Now, of the Abrahamic books, the Quran, the Torah, the Bible, Jesus has a place.
Let me just so the Jewish Bible, so the Torah is just one part of the Hebrew Bible. So
Okay,
the Abrahamic books or the books of the Abrahamic religions are the Quran for Islam, the New Testament, the Old and New Testament for Christianity, and the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible for the Jews. Okay, so the Torah is just the first five
the
books.
Torah is a part. So, what is the proper name for the Jewish book of
I
theology?
either the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament.
Ah, gotcha. Hebrew Bible, Old Testament. See, I learned something new. I know Jesus has a place in the Quran. Jesus has a place, obviously, in the Bible. Does Jesus have a
In
place
in
in the
in
Jewish
the
Bible?
in the Christian Bible and the New Testament. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
In
No.
the Christian Bible.
Yeah.
Does Jesus have a place even mentioned in the
No.
really?
No, because the Hebrew Bible, the last book of the Hebrew Bible was written around 200 BC. So it was two
It wouldn't,
centuries
yeah,
before
it
the
wouldn't
birth
even
of
hit that
Christ.
time.
So, yeah.
So is there any observation at all of the Jesus debate, of the quote unquote anti-Semitism coming from the perceived uh, relationship of Jesus and the Jews?
Oh,
So it is
because
just
look,
not.
Jesus never existed throughout the Hebrew Bible was written over the course of, I think it's 22 or 20 something books, 24, I guess 20 something books are in the Hebrew Bible. Um, so all of those books were written over the course of roughly 1,000 years, maybe 800 years, maybe. Um, and the last one was written long before the birth of Christ. And so there's no kind of issue, there's no different sects, no Christian sect, because there's no Jesus. The only reference to Jesus in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, are references to the future Messiah. Okay. So for the Jews, that's not a reference to Jesus, that's a reference to the Messiah. Whereas for Christians, when they look at the Old Testament and see references to the Messiah, they take it as references to Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
So I'll say it this way. Christians see many references to Jesus in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Jewish Bible. Jews see no references to Jesus. It's just references to the Messiah, and Jesus obviously is not the Messiah for Jews, and so.
Now, the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, is there any?
So the Old Testament. So the Bible of the Christians is the Old Testament plus the New Testament. So when Christians say the Bible, they mean the
Both.
Old and New Testament. For Jews, Jews also use the word the Bible, but the Bible for the Jews is just the Old Testament. Okay?
Mm.
Now there's basically the Old Testament that the Jews use and the Old Testament that the Christian use is basically the same. I think there's one extra book that's in the Christian Old Testament that is not included. I think it's the book of Maccabees, or I guess there's slight differences, but essentially it's the same book. It's the same Old
Mm.
Testament that the Jews use and the Christian use. It's just that when I say the Bible, I used to have this problem often when I came to the States. Somebody would mention the Bible, and to me that meant the Old Testament, but they meant the whole
The
thing, both
Christian Bible.
Testaments. Yeah, the Christian Bible is both Testaments. So we both use this term, the Bible, but the Jews just mean the Old Testament, and the Christians mean both Testaments.
Right. Now, this is a great time for me to ask this question, but it's probably a dumb question. Do Jews look at Christians as halfway right?
No, they look at Christians as full way wrong.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay, but if half of my understanding is all of your understanding,
I see what you mean. Yeah.
you feel
So
me?
yeah, yeah. So look, they see there's a kind of in the last 50 to 100 years, 70 years, 75 years, there's been this kind of uh, healing
Mm.
between Christian, mostly Protestants, and Jews, in the sense that Protestants are very interested in Judaism and in Jewish learning about the Old Testament because the Protestant Reformation, if every generation of Protestant revival, back in the original Protestant Reformation, and then in the Great Awakening, and then in the Second Great Awakening, and then what's called the Third Great Awakening in the mid 20th century, every generation of Protestant revival is an attempt to reconnect to the Old Testament roots of the New Testament and to the Jewish roots of Christianity and to the so look, the early Christianity is a mix of Jewish influences, a Jewish heritage, and a Greek heritage. And originally, in Roman times and in the Middle Ages, the Greek origins and the Greek basis of Christianity was very well studied and emphasized. In the Protestant Reformation, and each Protestant revival successively, more and more so, flipped it, highlighted the Hebraic or the Jewish roots of Jesus and of the early church and of Christianity over the Greek heritage, Greek influence. So Protestants and evangelicals at the forefront of this have always been interested and intrigued by Judaism, and in the last 70 years or so, there's been a real emphasis, and evangelicals have been on the forefront of the Zionist movement way back in the late 1800s in supporting the return of the Jews to their national homeland in Israel. And okay, so there's this real kind of interest and support. And over the last 50, 70 years, there's been a reciprocal willingness to kind of mend fences and be interested in one another on the Jewish side, because Jews have been for a long time kind of scared of Christians. But I think has been this growing recognition that evangelicals are sincere in their appreciation of Judaism and in their support for Jews. And therefore, there's this kind of growing recognition in some circles of Judaism, of Orthodox Judaism especially, that Christianity actually might be playing some sort of divinely ordained role in God's vision or plan for humanity. Okay, that the Jews have their little religion, and that's God's main kind of focus. But maybe this Jewish sect that became this massive religion called Christianity, maybe it's not some sort of chance occurrence. Maybe it's part of God's plan to introduce himself and introduce himself to the nations through Christianity. And so there's this, like you said, maybe they're not all wrong. Okay, maybe this is kind of an entree, God's greeting card to the nations, where God has a certain relationship with his people, and he establishes a different relationship with the other peoples. But I think it's an evolving understanding. But for the longest time, Jews saw Christians as somewhere between somewhere between pagans and misguided monotheists. And I think increasingly in some circles, there's a more charitable view of it, that maybe this is a vehicle for God to do something.
That was the part I never understood. And I thought maybe I misunderstood, because at the very least, Christians, now this is just me thinking even when I was a religious person, but definitely as a non-religious person without having a dog in the fight at all, if the primary figures of my religion are of it wasn't like Jesus changed religions and let go being Jewish. He was always Jewish. He never said we need to start a new religion. So I always wondered two things. One, why was why were Jewish people so distant from Christianity, and why, if the goal of Christians is to be like Christ, why are we not Jewish?
Right. So um, I'll answer the first first and the second second. I'm less certain about the second because I'm not qualified to speak for Christians. Um, Look, Jesus was never excommunicated by the Jews. Okay,
Right.
Jesus was seen again according to the story in the New Testament and what we know about history a little bit. Um, Throughout his life, Jesus was seen as Jewish.
Hmm.
And after he died, also in the early church, up until about 135 or so BC, AD, excuse me. So for about a century, Jewish followers of Christ, okay, the disciples and their crowds, they were seen as Jewish. Okay, they were seen as wrong, as following a false prophet, of having some sort of apostasy, but they were Jewish, Jews who are have a screw loose. They don't understand properly, they don't follow the proper authorities, but they are Jewish. In 130, because without getting into the details, there was this Jewish rebellion, the second great Jewish rebellion against Rome, um, and that Jewish rebellion had a messianic flavor. The Jewish general was seen as a kind of messiah, and the Jews, supported it. Good. But which Jews did not support it? The Christians, the Christian Jews. Okay,
Hmm.
because this general cannot be the Messiah because we already know who the Messiah was. The true Messiah was Jesus Christ. Okay, and so that rebellion, the Christian, the Jews who were followers of Christ, again, Christianity was not a separate religion at the time yet. Okay, Christians didn't see it as a separate religion, Jews didn't see it as a separate religion, and the Romans didn't see it as a separate religion. It was a Jewish sect. But that moment, that rebellion, where the Christians refused to join the Jewish rebellion because they couldn't theologically, they couldn't support this other Messiah. And so that moment, the Christians kind of separated themselves from the Jews. The Jews excommunicated, or from that point on, the Jews saw the Christians as no longer a Jewish sect, but a different religion. And Roman law reflected this as well. Okay, so Judaism remained legal in the Roman Empire, but this new religion called Christianity was outlawed. Okay, so
Hmm.
so that moment, the religions, these groups separated both as far as the Christians were concerned, and as far as the Jews were concerned, and as far as the Romans were concerned. So that at that point they're separate. I'll add that one of the discomfort in those early days, the doctrine of the Christian doctrine of the Holy Trinity, as I understand it, didn't yet exist. It formed roughly in the second century or third century AD. And one of the big problems that Judaism has had and does have with Christianity is this Trinity, which sounds to Jews as a kind of uh, polytheism. Okay, what you have three gods, but are they the same God, but they're just different things about it. Like,
Exactly.
look, Christians have a hard time. Look, I asked
Yes.
and I read about it, and I'm not a real dummy, and I cannot understand how are
Is
they
it three?
different?
Is it one? If it's
Well,
three, that's poly.
yeah, so and yes, they're three, but they're three things that make up one thing. Look, if I can't understand it, then I don't blame Jews 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago for not understanding it either. And so there's beyond the, false prophet and separateness, there's a fear, I'll say it this way. There's a suspicion or a fear that maybe these Christians who think that they're monotheists are in fact polytheists in some sort of unarticulated way.
I'm going to tell you this. As a child, I'm talking 3, 4, 5. I'm talking baby. I couldn't understand the poly versus monotheism because I'm thinking Jesus is God because we're not really talking about God most of the time, especially in a Baptist church. You're talking about Jesus. Now, my
Right.
just for the back, context, my father was Baptist, my mother was Catholic. So we grew up in both churches. You only really heard about God in the Catholic Church. The Protestant church was Jesus, 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 Jesus.
Yeah.
And so it was like, so as a child, you ask your elders, is Jesus God? And then they go, no. Well, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But and
Yeah. So look, it's it's
okay.
it's it's very complicated for Christians to understand.
I
And if
don't
it's
even think it's complicated. I think it just, well, okay, I'm not going to say that because people
well,
get
look,
mad.
it's hard to explain. It's hard for Christians for believing Christians to explain it to their children or to non-Christians. And therefore, if it's hard for a Christian to explain,
Right.
then you have to accept that it's going to be hard for a Jew or a Muslim or a Hindu to understand. It's a very difficult, complicated thing, this Trinity. And so that's one barrier. That's a beyond the previous things that are ethical and historical divisions. This is a purely theological barrier that makes it hard for Jews for believing Jews to accept at face value that the Christians are half right. You know, look,
Okay.
they have the Old Testament, just like us.
Right.
But I don't understand this Trinity. Are they really monotheistic? Are they like me, but they just have some false Messiah? Or are they not like me because I have God and they have this thing that they keep telling me is three things, but it's only one thing, but it actually has three parts, and it's so there's this kind of lack of clarity as to what who is the Christian God? Is the Christian God the same God as mine? They think
That's
so.
a fair point. That's
That,
a fair point.
that they think it is. I'm not sure because whenever I ask about this Trinity, I get this answer
That
I don't
goes in circles.
that I don't understand. Yeah.
But now here's something I don't understand. Are Jews the chosen people?
According to the Old Testament and according to the New Testament, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nobody else has, is it nobody else has God's favor or no one else has God's favor like Jewish people?
Like
What's
yeah,
the articulation?
this say and um nobody else has God's favor like the Jewish people because look, the basic story of all Abrahamic religions is the story of God and Abraham creating an alliance. Okay. And that alliance said that you and your descendants will be my people. I will be your God and you will be my people. Other people, of course, exist in the world, but I have a relationship. I am not the God of the Germanic people or of the Chinese people. I am the God of you, Abraham and his descendants. And that is accepted by all three Abrahamic religions. Now, in Christianity, there's this um, storyline of that's the Old Testament, that's the old alliance. Um, and now we have a new alliance. Okay. And the new alliance, basically the promise that God made to Abraham, he's now opening to all the peoples.
Everybody.
Everybody. Okay. So in in Judaism, who can be part of this special relationship between God and the Jews? Only Jews. If you're born a Jew or if you married in, you get to be part of this chosen people. Christianity says no, everyone can join. This relationship, this special relationship is open to anyone. It's no longer by birth, by blood, it's by faith. Anyone who opens his heart to God can be accepted and have this special relationship. Now, in Islam, they don't challenge the Jewish storyline. It's just that they say that the special
It was a
relationship,
progression.
no, to them, it went through Ishmael, not through Isaac. Okay, so Abraham, you remember, had two sons. Yeah, he had more, but his first two sons were
Mhm.
Ishmael and
Nice.
and Isaac. Isaac is the father, the patriarch of the Jews. Ishmael is the patriarch of the Arabs. And so to the Arabs, to the Muslims, um, that special relationship went through Ishmael, not through Isaac. And so they accept this thing about a special relationship with as a product of the alliance between Abraham and God, but that relationship went through Ishmael, not through Isaac.
Okay. And
Okay,
Christians,
so basically the only one that Christianity is the only religion that doesn't go by this kind of blood story, but instead changes the nature of the promise in the sense that there's a New Testament, a new alliance,
yes,
in
it's the
which
second
yeah,
covenant.
yeah, and in which God says it used to be a relationship with one people, and now I'm opening myself up to all of humanity.
Right. Now, did I understand you correctly? Because Christians believe in two covenants, the Mosaic covenant and then the new and everlasting covenant with Jesus.
Right.
Are you saying that Jewish people also believe in two covenants, but it's one with Abraham and one with Moses?
No, it's the same covenant.
It's the
It's
same
the
one.
same, yeah, it's the same covenant. In fact, there's a scene in the Exodus when I think it's with the sin of the golden calf, 90% sure. Um, when God has had it with these people, and he suggests to Moses, I'm done with them, kill them all, and I'll start a new covenant through you, a new promise to you, and basically the promise that I made Abraham, I will make to you and your descendants. These people are no
Okay.
good. And Moses talks him out of it, and he says, "You promised." Basically, he says, "You promised an alliance not to the good children of Abraham, not to the faithful children of Abraham. You promised an alliance to Abraham, to all of his descendants through Isaac. You can't." Moses tells God, "You can't back out of this. It's the same covenant. You're obligated." And here
Hmm.
I am.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, um, the Jews have the one covenant, which is articulated in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. The Christians have, like exactly what you said, there was an original one, and then a second covenant, a second testament.
Now, is Zionism a Jewish principle within the Jewish Bible, or is that strictly political?
No, it's definitely the home of the Jews, as articulated in the Hebrew Bible, that is the promised land for the Jews. Okay? When God chose Abraham, spoke to Abraham, he said, "Leave your country somewhere in Iraq and go to the place where I will show you, and I will give your descendants that land." And he takes them and he leads him to the land of Israel. And then the Jews go and become enslaved in Egypt, and God takes them out to the land of Israel, and He promises it to them again, and then they conquer it, and then they get exiled, and God brings them back again after the Babylonian exile. Um, and the prophecies of the prophets are about how after the exile, after all your suffering, you will come back. God, will bring you back to your land, the land of Israel, and those will be the days of the Messiah. Okay, that everything that's happening to you is by divine plan, and part of this plan is that you will eventually come back to the land that I chose for you, and you will be there, and those will be that is the promise.
Now, the concept of heaven or hell, does that exist in Judaism?
Okay, uh, you had to go there. So, look, the reason why you're asking is because it's unclear. In Christianity, it's definitely there. In Islam, it's definitely there. In Judaism, it's very problematic. It's problematic because it's hard to find
Reference.
you will not find it in the Torah.
Right.
You find a little bit of it in the prophets, and you find more about it of it in the what's called the writings, the third part of the Bible. Um, so there's a Jewish joke that says that there's no heaven, there's no hell. We all go to the same place when we die, where Moses and Rabbi Akiva give constant and everlasting classes on the Bible and the Talmud. For the righteous, this is heaven, and for the wicked, this is hell. Okay, so the experience, so we all study the Torah, uh, and for some it's heaven, for some it's hell.
Mhm.
So um, the point, so what Jews actually believe happens after death, it looks like it changed over time. Okay, based on when you read the Hebrew Bible and Jewish history after that, you see that an afterlife in which the soul continues to live after the body expires, and where God rewards good behavior and punishes bad behavior, it looks like this idea was foreign to biblical Israelites. It wasn't to the degree that the Torah and the early books of the Bible reflect Jewish beliefs in the biblical era. You don't see that. Again, a spirit that survives death and goes to a place where God rewards good and bad behavior. So the Egyptian religion was obsessed with death and the afterlife. But the Jewish religion, at roughly the same time, was really focused only on this world. And uh, there's no engagement with this concept of an afterlife, which is so central in the Egyptian religion. Um, then later books in the Hebrew Bible do include a handful of references to an afterlife, but no real discussion of it. Okay, it's not an important topic for the biblical author. Okay, it's a more earthbound religion. Um, but the last books of the Bible, chronologically, the last books that were included in the Hebrew Bible during the period of the Second Temple. So this is like the fourth and third century BC. So these books were written while the Jews were in the Babylonian exile in Iraq, or when they returned from there back to the land of Israel during the period of the Second Temple. Those books have more otherworldly elements like angels, an afterlife, Satan. So it looks like this concept of an afterlife is something that developed within Judaism over time, and maybe it developed in exile. Maybe it developed when the Jews were in the Babylonian exile because of interaction with Eastern religions. Who knows? Maybe it's an internal development. Maybe it's something that came in from the outside. But the point is that towards the end of the Bible, there's more an element of an afterlife and angels and demons, et cetera, et cetera. And then after the Bible, after the last book of the Bible was written, when you look at Jews under Roman rule, so this is we're getting into the Christian era, it looks like Judaism became more mystical, having more of these otherworldly elements in it of, again, angels, afterlife, Satan, et cetera, et cetera. And so Christianity was born at a time when Judaism had more mystical
Brought into
elements
that
in
area.
it. Yeah. Okay, so the original Judaism of the Torah, let's say, doesn't have these mystical elements, whereas the New Testament has a lot of it because in the 1,000 years that passed, Judaism over time became more incorporated more mystical or apocalyptical elements. And then over time, during the Roman era and the medieval period, Judaism incorporated more mystical and apocalyptic elements. However, I'll say that even today, where today religious Jews do believe in an afterlife and do believe in, actually, I'm not sure about Satan, if it's the same kind of idea of a Satan that Christians have. But in any case, today Jews do believe in an afterlife and immortality, the immortality of the soul. Um, but even today, Judaism is less interested in him than Christianity. Okay, so all these elements, the afterlife, the messianic future, the resurrection, etc., or heaven and hell, in Christianity, they are central preoccupations, whereas in Judaism, the central preoccupation is the mitzvahs, the commandments that Jews are obligated to observe in this world. That is the central preoccupation of Judaism, whereas it's all these do's and don'ts, 613 commandments.
So
Whereas,
is Zion a utopic mythological goal for Jewish civilization, or is Zion a literal synonym of Israel?
oh, synonym of Israel.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. It's just that in the messianic future, when the Messiah comes, the Jews will be in Israel. Okay, the Messiah will lead the Jews back to their homeland, to the physical place that we today associate with roughly with the borders of the state of Israel, roughly. So it's a physical place, but it's a physical place that is an idea in the sense that the end of days God will lead the Jews back to that place.
Okay, got 1 minute left. What do what is the biggest misunderstanding of non-Jewish people about Jewish people?
Hmm. Um, so I think I don't know if it's misunderstanding, but um, a sense of being perplexed by this obsession with especially Christians. Look, I'm sorry, I'll finish the sentence. Being perplexed by the commandments, by this obsession with eating at this time and not at that time, and eating these foods and not those foods, and wearing this thing and not wearing that thing, and when you can have sex with your wife and when you can't have sex with your wife, and raising your crops this way and that way, and saying the prayers this way. It's like an endless list of do's and don'ts, which to Christians, um, it's odd. Okay, it seems counter to religious faith. because for Christianity, religion is a matter of the only thing that matters is the faith. It's the only thing that matters. Okay, your conduct is secondary. Okay, in Judaism and in Islam, it's the reverse. Okay, the conduct, your
Your
observance
faith,
of
your faith is indicative of your conduct.
it's reflected in your conduct exactly.
Right,
Okay, if you are faithful, it means that you are obedient
right,
to all these rules that God gave you. So a Jew can be angry at God. You can be an atheist. You can think that God is unjust. But as long as you observe the 613 observances, you are a good Jew. Okay, you're doing what you're supposed to do. For a Christian, that it's 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 an oxymoron. You cannot be
right.
a good
An
Christian
atheist.
and not believe in God or not even love God. Okay.
Right.
So Judaism judges a man by his conduct, his observance of Jewish law. And again, the faith in God is part of the religion too, there's no doubt. But the main thing is your actions. And so um, the question is the bewilderment about these about these observances is why do you do it? Okay, and there are two answers. First is God said so. Okay, that's
Good
the first.
enough.
Um, and the second is what is the purpose of, why did God say so? And that we don't know. Okay, that we're speculating,
Right.
but to the degree that God clarified why he did so, he said it was to separate you, Jews, from the nations, from the Gentiles. The Gentiles do this, you will do that. The Gentiles eat this, you will eat that. So basically the commandment was meant to make the Jews different, make the Jews weird, make the Jews maybe hated, who knows? And make them odd, make them weird. Um, and and so there's this there's this explanation. It's a kind of nice explanation for anti-Semitism. That anti-Semitism is this really weird thing. It's this very old hatred, and it changes. In the religious era, anti-Semitism was based in religion. In the scientific era, it was based on science. Today, it's based on kind of this our 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 moral code, let's call it. So the reasons change, but the hatred itself is constant. And and so scholars of anti-Semitism kind of what explains that? And a religious Jew has an explanation in that God has signaled that the Jews are separate, and he marked them with a physical marking, and he marked them with all these weird observances that make them stick out and make them seem stuck up. Because look, they can't eat with you, they can't marry your daughter, they can't work with you, they can't share your table, etc., etc. And so it triggers a kind of resentment and a kind of and who do they think they're the chosen people? And so in this respect, maybe anti-Semitism is part of God's plan of how to keep his people separate from from the nations, if they're hated, if they're vilified. And so in that respect, anti-Semitism is a test for Jews in can you absorb all the persecutions and the violence and the humiliations, et cetera, that anti-Semitism imposes on you and remain faithful to God rather than
Now
convert.
that's going to be our next conversation
Okay,
because
so but
I want to get deep in. I want to really analyze two things in our next conversation: anti-Semitism and the Jewish observances, um, why they are, what they mean, and especially the anti-Semitism, because that seems to be as much about Jewishness as Jewish law. Like you were saying, that whole role going along with being the chosen people. But um, as soon as we can, we're going to get into that. Um, I still didn't get all my questions answered. This was excellent. I hope it's excellent for other people. Thank you
Excellent.
again, and you got to promise to make time for me so I can get more
I
information.
promise. All right. I'll see you next time. Thank you.